and yet they are everywhere, you know? Um, and it's, people notice these little images on the little Jeep Renegade. They're like, oh, that's so cool. And it costs them nothing. And it's actually a Fiat 500L underneath or whatever. Like, it's clever. That's clever product design. So yeah, but I don't want one myself. That's all.
Would you be upset if she was like, Dom, the only car I want is a Jeep, and we're gonna have a Jeep, and I'm gonna go out and buy a Jeep, and I expect you to be nice while driving in it? Or are you gonna just forever be like, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this? I'm gonna repeatedly say it until we get rid of it.
I actually, probably the latter, but I actually don't think we'd ever get to that point because there's definitely significant overlap. She loves the Bronco, which I actually think's kind of a cool car, the very latest. I don't know what market of Bronco it is, but I think it's a well executed product. And being in the US recently, oh my God, there's so many latest gen Broncos, especially the soft top, the rollback convertible. Those things are so popular, especially but weirdly, everybody I saw in it was like on their way to the gym and they're like yummy mums or whatever, or like women at 26 with all the hair done, all the nice clothes and big high heels getting out of a Ford Bronco. I'm like, it's not what a Bronco's supposed to be, is it? I think that's quite interesting for product placement. But I mean, I also love, actually we both like the Jimny. We do both. Yeah, nice. We do both like the Jimny, and my love of that vehicle. So that could be a
is the
genuine
Suzuki
thing. The only thing
Jimny,
is, like, for roads here in Quito.
Is it sold in Ecuador? The Jimny?
Yeah. Well, it's actually easier to get here. The Jimny is easier to get here in Ecuador and Latin America than it is like Europe because of the differences in emissions regulations. I think we spoke about this before, but I don't know fully what happened. But when they released the Jimny, like 6 to 8 months later, it was banned as a passenger car. That's the worst color, but I do love charcoal grey for me. But yeah, they've banned it in Europe as a passenger vehicle because it fails emissions regulations. So they can only sell it as a light commercial vehicle. So they can only sell it as a 2-door with 2 seats and an extended boot with a rail up behind the 2 seats. Whereas here in Latin America, obviously emissions regulations are quite different. You see hundreds of them as passenger vehicles, which is obviously the one you want. You want a 5-seater. You want that flexibility of passengers versus a boot. The only thing I would say is we drive I don't even know the gen because I don't really that familiar with Mitsubishis, but it's a huge Mitsubishi SUV 7-seater, and Paolo likes that because it's safe, right, on these Quito and Ecuador roads that are at times like horrendously potholed, especially driving towards the Amazon. So you don't get that same feeling of sturdiness and security in a car so compact, but I think that's why I like it so much because it's cleverly designed. That's why I like Lotuses so much, because they're like the most efficiently packaged cars in the world. They're brilliant. I'd have a Lotus SUV all day long. Would you? I mean, if you wanted an SUV, would you have a Lotus SUV?
Are they coming out with the EV SUV?
Yeah, but I don't know when.
What is that called?
Actually, I'm going to search that now. It's a good question. I don't even know.
It's far out. Oh, they have it. Wow, they have it on their home page here. Let me pull this up. Can you believe how they're describing this?
Kind of been tested already. So I mean, I would expect
the electric hyper SUV with race car DNA. I mean, it looks cool.
Exactly. Like, because I look at the Urus, right? Because I'm not a fan of Lamborghini anymore, but I used to love them. Like, to me, this is probably what I mean. I know Lamborghinis are eccentric, but to me, they the Miura was still elegantly designed, right? And classic Lamborghinis, even though they were quite eccentric, they if you'd have taken that design ethos into an SUV, you could have executed something far better than an Urus or Urus or whatever the hell it's called. To me, this is what it should have been. Like, I think this is a cool car. It's well executed. I know it'll be light. It'll be efficient. It'll be ergonomically excellent because that's Lotus. Yeah, they put a lot of effort into product design and they're really good at getting customer feedback, and they spend so much effort on packaging. They're really clever at like making decisions on fasteners, which fastener to use to save weight, like McLaren do. So like, I have no doubt this will be an excellent car. I would have it all day long if I was in the market for an SUV. Look at the interior. It's really nicely executed.
It's unreal. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine
But
this
no one talks
is.
about Lotus. Why not?
They had a pretty big lull, and for how long it has been
Yeah,
such a niche brand. I mean, this is finally applicable
yeah,
to so many different drivers, whereas before you were a very specific
it is.
buyer for Lotus.
Yeah, it's true. But I mean, the Elise is still recognized as one of the greatest, still one of the greatest driver cars, right? Especially for its weight, for its size and weight and range. I mean, that's why the Tesla Roadster used an Elise, right? Because they looked at it, they did some benchmarking and went, holy shit, this thing's incredibly efficient. It's one of the lightest cars you can get. So obviously, for an electric vehicle with inefficient batteries and at that time inefficient and heavy motors, you need the lightest. You need I guess, the highest strength to weight ratio you can get. And they looked at the Elise and went, this is perfect. So yeah, to me, I think this is as long as they can do it, because I don't know if you remember, like, was it 10 years ago? They had a guy come in. I can't remember his name. I need to do some research on this. They had a guy come in with this crazily ambitious plan. I think they were funded by, who were they funded by? It was a South Korean car company, but it wasn't obviously Hyundai or Kia. And they had this crazy ambitious. They were going to bring back the Elan and the Elise and a whole host of old names, as well as like a four-door GT that would have been like Taycan competing, or maybe Panamera. I don't think they were talking EV at that time. And then obviously it turns out it was an absolute farce. They had no way of raising, they had no funds to do that. It was completely blind ambition. Whereas obviously now, being funded by Geely have the money. They, just like they've done with Volvo, they give them the autonomy and say, guys, crack on, do your thing. So like, this thing will actually come to fruition. So now I'm like, right, this is where Lotus could be a really interesting brand. It's why I invest in Geely, because I look at like smart car execution. I look at the amount of car companies starting to build on Geely platforms or asking Geely to help build platforms. I'm like, fucking hell, Mercedes-Benz, Geely, give us a hand to design a platform. I'm like, wow, that says a lot about Geely. And I mean, to me, Volvo are doing great stuff. Would I own a Volvo if I had like a family or something? Of course I would, absolutely. Like, they're well executed, well designed, reasonably priced. I mean, are you a fan of Volvo? What do you think about Volvos? Because they're a bit more niche in the US, aren't they, than like Europe?
Yeah, they definitely are. Like, I wouldn't say they're by any means common, but you see Volvos around, and generally, if they aren't just like a used car special and someone got coerced into buying it and they didn't know what they were getting, Volvo owners are generally Volvo owners for life. When you meet one, they're like, I've always bought Volvos. I'm a Volvo
Yes.
person. We're a
Yeah.
Volvo family. And how that translates to like Polestar and their EVs, my prediction is that's going to have a whole new wave of consumers, and it might not translate. Like, you are an EV buyer and you are interested in Polestar and you compare your different EV choices, and for whatever reasons you pursued to purchase a Polestar. And I'm curious to see how that affects Volvo as a company long term. Like, what does Volvo look like in 10 years, specifically in the North American market? Um, I'm not sure, but it's interesting. Would you go into depth a little bit more about like Geely and kind of where they have all of their capital deployed and everything they're working on? Because the more I learn from you, the more it's surprising on how everything they're working on and the
It's
directions each of
this.
those
You can
brands are
see
taking.
Yeah, so I mean, they've got the London Electric Vehicle Company, right, who do the electric taxis that are
Mm.
prominent in England, but they're now starting to use because I mean, on the face of it, you go, it's a really niche product, right? In fact, let's for I guess to show people because I mean, outside the UK, I don't know if people will be that familiar with um, what this vehicle is, right? But one of the absolute fundamentals, and I can't get the numbers right. I think this is, it's an interesting shape of design. They have suicide doors, as they call them, for like a Rolls Royce does, because that's the way to keep the aperture as big as possible for entry and egress, right, of people into a car. If this is a custom vehicle that's specifically for taxis. Um, in London, traditionally, the old London taxi. Um, but
Go ahead
in
and
addition
share
to that,
your. Are
the
you sharing
original
the
and
tab?
actually the newer
Are
one,
you sharing the one tab?
am I
Share the tab
am I
of
only showing the
the
one tab?
London Electrical Vehicle Company.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
So you can
There
see
you go.
this is the modern
Mm.
taxi, right? But obviously the original one, if I go back to I'll just type in, they call it London Cab, right? London Cab is like an old school name for a taxi in English. This is the original, right? And
Mm.
it had, egress was okay, right? But what they did is just looked and went, oh, let's do suicide doors, right? So you remove the B pillar. So it's, you have a huge aperture, just like you do in a Rolls Royce, right? So really clever. But one of the other fundamentals of the London taxi was an incredibly aggressive turning circle, like best in class for its vehicle size, right? Because a taxi needs to be agile. You're not looking for huge amounts of power, decent torque, and I, again, don't know the ranges. But turning circle was always their big thing, right? Which requires really sensible packaging in the front to be able to give the wheel enough ability to turn. One of the things, along with suspension components, one of the things that restricts turning circle is the overall package under the hood, under the bonnet. So obviously a lot of packaging work there, and obviously having an electric vehicle, if you're clever, you can, because you don't have an internal combustion engine. Like you can do some funky things to give yourself a really clever turning circle. So now what the London electric vehicle community are doing are branching out to other products. So now they do a van, which makes sense, right? They're looking at commercial vehicles. They're looking at doing MPVs, like a multi-purpose vehicle, almost like a van, like a minibus, which again could be used as a large taxi, but could also, I guess, be used by large families. So what Geely are trying to do is really build out, like kind of covering all bases. They've got Zeekr, who are really pushing autonomous technology in China. In fact, again, don't know if people are familiar with Zeekr actually as a brand. Um, I'm not a huge fan of all the design, but the new
Mm.
SUV, XSUV, is a little bit funky looking. I've actually got a friend who works for Geely, funny enough. Well, actually works for Lynk & Co, another brand under the Geely name, right? But these are vehicles that are coming to the US and are coming to Europe. Like these are not like a lot of China brands that don't necessarily meet the crash requirements for global requirements. These vehicles are designed from the beginning.
Mm.
And again, because Geely, again, back to this tab here, because Geely has so much integration with Volvo, with Polestar, with Lotus, with Smart. I mean, smart cars, have to be incredibly efficient from a crash perspective because they're so small. How
Sure.
do you move all that energy? So that their China brands are being developed from scratch to be global vehicles, which isn't that common in China. And in addition, by the way, Geely, let me quickly search. I need to get the stats on this right. But Geely has a significant investment in Aston Martin. So they've increased their equity stake. So they now
Interesting.
have a 17%. Yeah. So Geely Holding increases equity stake in Aston Martin Lagonda to circa 17%. So this is their first attempt to go ultra luxury. And Aston Martin have not been a profitable company for a long time, right? They're also, I think,
Right.
still the only car company, or one of the very few, like one of only 3 or 5 car companies in the world that are not part of a automotive conglomerate, like a Stellantis, like a GM, like a Volkswagen, for example. But recently, Aston Martin also announced record profits. So it's kind of interesting that Geely's timed this investment for that. And obviously Aston Martin, you can say what you want about their cars, but they are, I don't know what you think, but to me, they are sexy cars. Like they are always cool. I would say in terms of brand reputation, it's up there with Porsche.
Yep.
Do
So,
would you agree with that? 'Cause again, definitely on the Europe side, but on the US side, would you say Aston Martin has that brand reputation?
well, I'm curious to see what you think about their. Let me answer your first question first. I think without a doubt,
Yeah,
Aston Martin has really done well with their presence in subtle advertising and marketing and being in the face of consumers with their brand attached for many years. I think most prominently, you think about the success of
yeah,
James Bond movies for so many years, right? And so people just
yeah.
associate it with like a nice watch brand. If you say Aston Martin, you could know nothing about cars, but you understand it is of a very high quality, sexy sports plus luxury automobile, classic English brand, been around for a long time, has historic prominence in a lot of different fields, including racing. Um, but I'm wondering, because they've had some missteps, when you think about the past 2 or 3 decades of Aston Martin, from either just poor management of the business, wrong partnerships, when you think about some of the manufacturing in the early 2000s and the quality of the cars, you think about um, just the
Hmm.
price point you get for the car you get. And a lot of times when I think about reviews of Aston Martins coming out, especially when I became much more attuned to the world of cars, the technology wasn't there. When you could compare it, it didn't check the boxes compared to some other potentially German competitor, but the price point demanded a lot more. And I think that's always helped them in a slight way in comparing, well, if you have an Aston Martin, you're special. And I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on the reason that things have somewhat turned around for the brand, especially recently when they're announcing profits, when they have exterior investment. When you think about their Formula One team having a lot of success due to a recent outside investment, they have the SUV out. Like, what do you think has really turned the tides for Aston Martin when thinking about 10, 20, 30 years ago to where they are today?
It's a really good question, actually. Um, I don't know how many people are familiar with like the history of the automotive industry in Britain, but manufacturing in England has always been consistently underfunded, and so from like the 70s onwards, when Britain actually sold a lot of its privately and even publicly held businesses, the car industry was always quite complacent. The German brands, who were obviously recovering from World War, were working their socks off to, BMW was selling pots and pans, because they was limited by I forget the agreement, right? The Western agreement. They were moving into bubble cars. So it was Mercedes-Benz, I think, providing aerospace components. That was it. Um, and so, Britain got really complacent. And then obviously that's why, Jaguar and other brands kind of really fell by the wayside. And then government intervention led to consolidation of loads of brands under like British Leyland, for example. But then Rover collapsed, and all of these British companies, through complacency, through, I mean, one argument is about strength of unions, limiting companies' flexibility. All of these different things meant that these brands started to fail. Um, Hence, Jaguar was really struggling. Were owned by Ford. Aston Martin were owned by Ford for a while as well, as part of the Premium Automotive Group. I think PAG, yeah, Premium Automotive Group. Um, and then it was only when they were sold to the, I think, Dubai Investment Group, and obviously that gave them flexibility, but they were really limited in funding. And the other problem is, if you look across the automotive industry at, like we said, one of the very few companies that are not part of a conglomerate, right? So whenever you look at, I mean, I don't know if you put Porsche and Aston Martin together. I think you would. Aston Martin to me aren't a Ferrari, or a Koenigsegg, or Zenvo or Rimac, right? To me, they're more of a Porsche. But I might be wrong. I'd love to get your views on that. But irrespective, if you look at from a commercial perspective, Porsche don't design custom cars, right? They might design a platform with help of Volkswagen, right? Or Volkswagen help design a platform, but all of these products are not single use. Each vehicle, even 911 is on a platform. I don't know what platform actually, but it's like a premium sports architecture. And so if you have this engineering and you have all of these components that are common between multiple vehicles, right? It does limit some of the design. And if you look at like obviously going back to like more base commercial cars, like if I remember one stat which is amazing, the Mark One Porsche Cayenne and the Mark One Volkswagen Touareg had the exact same doors, the same part number. So like these aren't different cars. If you look at the body structure, they are almost unrecognizable. Even and that includes the apertures for the rear lights. If you look at the Touareg and the Porsche Cayenne, the rear lamps, they're almost the same. They're just little subtle changes to give it distinction. Really clever. Aston Martin don't have that and didn't have that. And so for a long time, they were scrambling and obviously just doing one-off custom cars, low volumes, and obviously, therefore paying people less money. Maybe they weren't that competitive from a price perspective. So the people working, either maybe weren't the highest quality or they weren't that enthusiastic because they could have probably got better work elsewhere. And so I think there was issues with reliability. They were, again, complacent, living off brands, and also struggling to do well commercially because they didn't have the efficiency of being part of a larger organization where they could share engineering components. So to make things work, you have to make some sacrifices, i.e. cheap material selection, maybe buying buttons off the shelf from like Toyota or something. If you look at Lexus, they do that. And I really dislike Lexus interiors because they copy Toyota a lot and use common components. No, I think what really had an impact, if you look at the trajectory, I think is the collaboration with Red Bull Formula One, the introduction of Adrian Newey. Now, I think some of the change came with a new CEO who introduced that. But I mean, if I look at like the Valkyrie series and some of the more recent work on actually vehicle design, again, around efficiency, around packaging, taking those lessons from Formula One, which Aston Martin never had before. If you look at the recent vehicles, that's been a huge step change. The Dubai Investment Fund, I'm almost sure it's Dubai Investment Fund, putting a lot of money into Aston Martin to give them a bit more freedom. Then obviously Geely taking a stake. It wouldn't surprise me if Geely weren't providing some components, some engineering consultancy. That will make a big difference. So I think that's the main reason. Then obviously just accepting, being a bit more grown up and saying, look, we're going to have to make an SUV because the world's going that way. And we need the volumes to give us the cash flow so we can do some more niche stuff. So doing the DBX, and that's a cool car. Like you're not going to sell 50, 60, 70,000 DBXs a year. You're just not. But if you suddenly can sell 10 or 12,000 of them with a decent profit margin, you've got cash flow, and now you can use that. So I think those decisions, I think have all kind of helped. I don't think there's one specific point, but yeah, that's my opinion really on why Aston Martin have kind of got to a slightly better point, but we'll see. I mean, they've got to this point before and then still struggled, so who knows?
It's interesting to hear you kind of draw either parallels or dissimilarities between Aston Martin and Porsche. I think for those listening who are Porsche diehards, and we know there's many of them, and sometimes I classify myself as one. I
definitely.
How do you consider almost like the enthusiasts for the two brands? Because I think Porsche has been held up significantly by just the brand loyalty that Porsche has. And they've done things by listening to the customers and going back on decisions they made about their automobiles, including their most high end of saying, we're getting rid of manuals and the GT cars, uproar. Okay, we're bringing them back. Okay, people want manuals in our ongoing cars. Well, we're going to charge extreme amounts to make a limited production, and people are paying for it. And when I go to a Porsche dealer, even here in the US, the amount of people bringing in their cars, shopping for new cars. It just seems like I can't ever imagine Aston Martin getting into a place of that. And maybe it's unfair to compare the two brands in that sense, but why do you think there's been such a brand loyalty built around one car company such as Porsche? And when you think about other high-end cars such as Aston Martin or other brands you can draw parallels, there just doesn't quite feel like the same frenzy almost around the brand.
It's a really good point. I definitely just, by the way, I definitely don't think that Aston Martin and Porsche are the same in terms of brand strength, in terms of that cult. I'd call it a cult following. I mean, not only is just the name Porsche iconic, I know people, Aston Martin, James Bond, and people get all nostalgic about a DB5, and for me, I still look at the cars and because I get, me, I get pretty bored now. I get frustrated with a lot of vehicle design. It's very samey. I love that Aston Martin still don't do that. They still like to push boundaries and they create some genuinely attractive, beautiful vehicles. I think one of the most important, or one of the reasons brands are successful. You literally said it a minute ago. They listen to the customers, and they give customers what they want or what they need. Now and I've said this to you before, that to me, Porsche are the Apple of the automotive industry, and Apple are very good. I mean, Apple do create vehicles that no one needs a Porsche, no one needs an Apple, but God, do people want them? And then they're also really good, and you've had this experience, right, when you own the Macan. Once you do, so not only do they create products that are aspirational, and I think they're really good at selling the lifestyle. Like the best brands also sell, they don't even sell the product, they sell the lifestyle that your product will give you. And it's often nonsense. Like, you're not going to suddenly be able to just drive up and down the Pacific Highway, right, because you own a Porsche, but you're living in London. But they're still great at giving you, I could if I wanted to. They're great at, selling a lifestyle. And so, but then once you're in the brand, once you own the Apple, the iPhone or the Mac, once you own the 911 or the Cayenne, they're very, very good at generating and keeping people in there, that brand loyalty aspect. And not only, I think, is that through listening to what people want for next generation products, but even in terms of the experience, right? And maybe you could, because there aren't many people, right, who actually get the chance to own a Porsche, whether it be a freaking Macan or a Cayenne, GT, 911, 718, box, whatever it is, 944. I'd be interested to hear more a little bit about your experience on the customer side, owning the Macan, and like how you were treated, and some of because there's a couple of anecdotes I remember you telling me before around the experience that you had, and it's like, that's clever. Like that's you just want to keep doing it. You just want to stay in that because it just makes you feel special, doesn't it? Again, brands are good at that.
Yeah.
Successful brands anyway.
I think what started my journey into becoming interested in Porsches from a customer's perspective, although I always thought the brand was cool and I loved the 911, but I really didn't have an affinity for it. And I think what started my enthusiast automobile passion, outside of just researching, outside of just oohing and awing and consuming content online and actually purchasing, was another German automobile in BMW, and especially the early 2000s M cars. And I fell in love with them. And I kind of kept some blinders on, probably because of my stage in life and financial capabilities on what I could purchase. I think some of those used M cars are a pretty good deal on a thrilling ride. And, I stayed there for a while. But then what drew me into Porsche, I think, starts by meeting someone who is in the Porsche club. And you talk to them, and they respect if you're driving a BMW M car or whatever, but you get onto the topic of why they are interested in Porsche. And it quickly turns into, well, once you drive one, you'll know. You just got to drive one, and it's just like, and then you'll be hooked. And
Yeah.
so my professor back in college had raced for Porsche Footwork back in the day. He was a Formula 2 driver and had 911s all his life, his early bachelor days, into his first marriage. And he started raising a family, and he sold his cars, and then eventually he got back into a Cayman S with a ton of miles, and he still has it today. And it's kind of his cheap,
Love it.
fun Porsche that is fairly simple, but he took me out for a drive in it one day after class when I was still attending college. And it was an incredible experience. One, just seeing a professional drive it, like drive it to the limit. And then he let me take the wheel. And I just remember like how precise and low to the ground, and the font on the gauges and all of this just felt so unique and very special. Like you could tell that this was part of a brand, and you're experiencing its version of what it wanted to display. And in the Cayman's case, a light, affordable, mid-engine car that you could really toss around and have fun. And that was my first taste. And I said, that was very cool. Do I want this car? No, because it's very limited in its utility and didn't really suit my needs at the time. But as soon as I had the opportunity to become interested in purchasing a Porsche, and I found their certified pre-owned program, which I think is an incredible opportunity to buy a used Porsche, could be 10 years old, could have over 100,000 miles, but if it's still certified by Porsche, you get unlimited 2-year bumper to bumper warranty with unlimited mileage in that 2-year period. And I was like, that's an incredible warranty. What cars are available at that price point that I was looking at underneath their CPO program? And I discovered a well-loved Macan Turbo that had some miles on it, but it came certified and it looked cool. And I became kind of obsessed with pursuing this vehicle. And it suited my needs well, because I think the Macan, you get the driving feel of a sports car, and it's actually on the same wheelbase as the 911. And I'm not sure how the chassis differs, but you get that tight, nimble feeling, but you get 4 doors and a hatch, and it's high to the above the ground, all-wheel drive, PDK transmission, but you get all the modern tech too. And I said, well, that sounds like me right now. So I went down and bought it. And I think the experience of going to the dealership, they have the car sitting out front, a welcome Mr. Bauer at the airport. Oh, let's bring you in. Let's have all this nice espresso waiting and Fiji water, and we'll get you in and out quick. And just kind of a really like, this is not the dealership experience. So, and then from that point, I owned the
This
car
isn't Ford.
for, no, this is not buying a Focus at the dealership on Main Street.
Yeah, exactly.
And I love the car. It had everything I wanted in an SUV and so much more. From, again, the same font in the Cayman, the same font they've been using on the gauges since the 70s. The classic mechanical sound of it starting up, even though this was a V6 that has similar lineage to other Volkswagen products, although this one had been tuned and built by Porsche. Somehow the exhaust still had that kind of classic Porsche rattle when you started up, and it had the high-speed starter motor and the ignition on the left, and all the buttons felt like an airplane cockpit. And I was like, this is cool. I really love it. And the car was incredible performance. I drove it across the country, I don't know how many times. And it kind of just solidified to me that this brand is really special, and the cars they produce is special. And I kind of understand this cult fever. The prices of new ones still kill me. And the fact that every option is excruciating dollars, that I don't know how they justify $750 for a different color of the face for the clock. It all comes with the clock. You get Sport Chrono package, you get the chronometer clock. But if you want that in a different color, it's going to be $750. And I'm like, what? Is it the difficulty of changing that? I mean, they must have those clocks sitting in different colors on the shelves. And if you order it, they put it in. But damn, some of those options are just killer. Either way, I still love it.
Honestly,
charge me up that one.
it's not. So I know for a fact that there are, having worked in the car industry, right, for a while. It's a lot of warranty parts have at least a 500% markup. Car companies make quite significant amounts of money back through warranty, not warranty, I guess, repairs beyond warranty, right? Especially premium manufacturers who will always encourage you to go to the main dealer. Don't go to Joe down the street, go to the main dealer. And of course, the labor's not $13 an hour. It's obviously a lot more, and part markup with the Porsche, with the Land Rover, with the Ferrari, whatever brand on it, rather than like common parts, they are kind of expensive. Now, admittedly, I would assume, it won't be a cheap part because it's custom, like it's unique. It'd be a unique size, that you're not going to, these aren't made in millions of components. It's a common, component on every car around the world. It might even be specific to a McLaren. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, they wouldn't charge it unless people bought it. So it says to you that people must be selecting those options, right?
It's true. And
again though, that actually weirdly can help. I know, like you say, if it was something essential and people, were like being charged $2,000 for a wiper blade, obviously people would kick off, and that's how you lose brand loyalty. But that kind of stuff, people love that they could have something that gives them a bit of a uniqueness. So this is, no one else has got a McCann like me.
mm-hmm.
That helps brand loyalty, customization. Or even though I think we're moving towards a world where a lot less people own cars, I imagine Porsche's targeted customers are probably slightly different. They're more mature people they're older people who are more likely to own a car as opposed to just lease it for a couple of years and then move on to a new one. Or not even have a car, because obviously we're living in a world where a lot of cars will move to like car hiring. I need a car just for a couple of hours, whatever. That's going to be common in like Gen X's, Gen Z's. But yeah, they're not necessarily Porsche's target customers. So customization, I think, is still really key. But yeah, really interesting. Really, I love that insight into customer experience. It's really interesting for me.
The part I am curious is, like, how does that translate to younger generations when you say things like less people are buying a car, more people are hiring a car, whether that means they're renting it to drive themselves or they're having someone else drive them to locations. When you think about the enthusiast brands, some of the few that we've mentioned in this podcast, but also many others, will there be a deviation of people who look at cars very differently than just a means of transportation, almost as a hobby or a passion? Whereas we can kind of conflate the two, and that's why we have enjoyed cars and growing up with them. And when I think about things like taking your boat out onto the lake, or having a super bike that you bring to the track, or a snowmobile that you ride trails on in the winter, it's a hobby, right? You buy these things, you keep them stored, you use them on special occasions. Obviously, the examples I mentioned are significantly less than the cost of some of these cars, but is that where the enthusiast car industry is heading over the next 5, 10, 15 years? What are your thoughts?
That's a good question. I don't think it's in quite the time frame you've said, but I really could see it going that way. Especially like if you look at, I mean, like, so you and I both know other car enthusiasts, right? I've worked in the car industry. If you work in the car industry, you tend to, especially if you're designing cars and whatever, you tend to have a bit of a passion for them.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of need to, otherwise, what are you doing? And so, but they're not the majority of people. The majority of people own a Hyundai Kona, a Ford Fusion, a Toyota Corolla, right? These are the majority of cars. These are the majority of car owners. And these people they need a form of transport that they feel safe in, that is cost efficient, gets them from A to B, and probably they can fit their kids in and some luggage. For most people, when they're buying a car, that's kind of the limit. I kind of want it to look nice, oh, I like the seats are comfortable. Oh, I've got a radio, or I can connect my phone and play some music. But they're quite basic stuff. Not that many people, I don't believe, because I look at the cars that are being sold, are specifically selecting a Toyota Corolla as the world's most popular vehicle because it's dynamic, because they love how it understeers a little into certain corners. Because they can it's got incredible torque, and the acceleration scares them a little. That's not why people buy a Toyota Corolla or a Ford Fusion or whatever. I forget what it is in the US, like Escort, old school UK Ford. And so obviously then if you think about, I know it's been coming for a while, but vehicle autonomy, right? Autonomous vehicles. If in 20 to 25 years, they're genuinely capable of that, which they really should be, whether it be through LiDARs, whether it be through camera technology. I mean, obviously, because as you know, I'm now in the field of autonomous technology and cameras and smart vision and AI, machine learning. We are finally starting to get momentum where these things are possible. It's happened multiple times throughout the decades, and it's never quite actually come to fruition. It really is now. And so if it becomes a thing in 20 years where there are genuinely autonomous vehicles, most people use most cars most of the time for commuting, for journeys that are essential, not because they want to, but because they need to go to work. They need to go to the supermarket. So if you don't have to think about driving, if you can just get into your car and you can be on your phone, or you could do your makeup, or you could have a video call, or you could just rotate your chair back and have a chat with someone in the back seat, you would, wouldn't you? Like why I would, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't love a morning commute. I even car enthusiasts. There aren't many that have a morning commute that's, on country B roads, and they get up to 70, 80 miles an hour into really single lane tracks, and they're really throwing their 911 into, like, it's not a thing. You're stuck in traffic. And so for most people, they'll just want the car to maybe look cool. But again, we might even find a homogeneity around car design as it evolves into vehicle autonomy. So then it's all about interiors. It's not even about the dynamics of the car at all. It'll be about, we might see suspension systems and chassis evolve to be far more along the French model, which is actually around comfort rather than dynamics. And so I could definitely see cars going that way. And therefore, if you only really need a car for commuting and it self-drives, we might even find that most people don't want to own a car, because maybe taxis become incredibly cheap because drivers aren't needed, and the vehicle cost comes down, because it could spiral into a very different way. But what it will do is create a really strong cult of people who do still care about driving. You'll still get, you'll probably still get really low volume manufacturers, maybe even still using internal combustion engines, but they'll be really rare, because obviously that's terrible for the environment, right? And it is. Obviously, we know it's not great, but in really low volumes, it's manageable. Of course, it is. You probably still have Morgan building cars out of wood with little, 4-cylinder, 5-cylinder, little 2-liter engines. Like, why not? Because they might only sell, I don't know, 1,000 a year. But God, will they be popular? The waiting list will be through the roof, because those things are so niche. But then the question becomes, like, would Porsche be, what are Porsche customers? How are they going to evolve? Will people who own a Porsche Cayenne, knowing that for a lot of people, a Porsche Cayenne or a Porsche Macan is probably their second car in a family. I think there's a lot of people for whom, especially Porsche customers, it's their second car. So if that's their commuter vehicle, they love the Porsche brand, but I need it to take the kids to school. Maybe vehicle autonomy even goes into the Cayenne and the Macan. In which case, like, would that go into the Taycan? Would that go into the Panamera too? You can see it happening. You can definitely see it happening. So then that creates a really interesting query and unknown around the future of those kind of brands. But I think there will always be people who want to drive. There will always be brands who provide vehicles to be driven. There will always be, niches, just like there is in any other field in the world, any other technology piece, any other thing that you want to own. There are high volume LP turntables, vinyl turntables. But if you want to spend the money, you could buy something of one of 50 and it's carved out of pure titanium and, it looks incredible. So that'll probably be where the car industry goes. It's quite sad in some ways, but you might actually get some really cool stuff because at really low volumes, you can be really crazy.
And I think you're
That'll be
starting to
interesting.
see some of these high-end brands really put out some unbelievable cars recently, like these special series, these limited runs. When you think about the top supercar manufacturers, many of them are even having a more exclusive line of these limited run
Oh yeah,
2 million cars. And it seems like a lot of them are doing it
Bugatti
and
Chirons.
releasing it.
Bugatti's a great example. Bugatti's a great
Mm-hmm.
example of always doing one-offs. They love to do one-offs. You've got Ferrari, who do the custom vehicle division, that literally build a car to someone's design. So a customer will go and say, I really love the Enzo front end, but I hate the rear end. But I'm a huge fan of, I don't know, an F50. Could you blend like the F50 style cockpit into an Enzo front end, and then I don't know, a Stradale rear end, a California rear end or something. That happens, and that's amazing. Or I want a modern version of a GT, or a Daytona. Go and make me one. I'll pay you $12 million or whatever. It's even more. As a brand, of course, you'll say yes to that, and it's a great fun. I mean, that actually can stimulate more engineering. From a STEM perspective, you can see more engineers getting into the car industry to be able to work on projects like that. But I think it becomes more and more niche. So yeah, even Ferrari, like in that kind of world, would knowing that Ferrari's already going into the SUV market now, right? Would Ferrari become not like crazy high volumes, but would they end up even could there be autonomous Ferraris one day? Because even the SUV becomes a second car. This is my second Ferrari. This is my commuter Ferrari. You could see it.
Totally. I
It's an
think
interesting world we could be going into.
I think that's a great framework to leave this first conversation with, the world of what if and what happens to these brands that
Autonomous
have
Ferraris.
what the hell, the day that happens, and it surely could. Well, this is the first episode of the Cars Less Travel podcast. I am Drake, and I'm here alongside Dom, and we are excited to continue to share stories about cars and unique insights we have from being both enthusiasts and some experience in the industry as well. Thank you so much. All right, Dom, I'm going to go ahead and stop this, and then let's stay on. And I think it takes a little bit to upload.